Hi there, my name's John Martin, I work for NetApp. I'm going to be talking today about software defined. Now, I kind of really love software defined and I kind of really hate it as a term because it's been overused. So I'm going to start with a little bit of exactly what is software defined. So we go back to the original inception of software defined. It was really about networking, and the whole idea about separating the control plane from the data plane made a lot of sense because that was how switches and routers were built. Okay? The trouble is we've now taken this entire sort of concept of separating the control plane from the data plane and we apply it to absolutely everything, even to stuff where it doesn't really make that much sense. Okay? So software defined for a lot of people, I mean, what does it mean? Does it mean that you're going to end up with a data center that looks like this? Because for a lot of people, software defined just means cheap, crappy hardware, general purpose fungible commodity hardware. It's, running with something else, right? And for a lot of people, that's what software defined means. In fact, if you're a vendor and you have a software defined strategy that kind of requires your customers to buy high margin hardware, then you should probably think again, because most of your customers are going to look at you and go, yeah, right, and then laugh behind your back, because software defined, this is certainly an aspect of that. This is kind of what people are after. They don't want to pay for high margin hardware anymore, right? So, if it's not going to be the white box stuff, is this what software defined looks like? Well, you have to run your stuff, your smart software on something. So it doesn't mean necessarily going to empty out your data center, or does it? Because arguably the most commodity level stuff these days is going to be sitting in somebody else's data center. It's probably going to belong to Amazon or Microsoft or IBM or a service provider that is actually understands how to take together lots and lots of commodity stuff and program it. Because while it's really great to talk about software-defined and programmable infrastructure and moving from plugging together cables to plugging together APIs, right? There aren't a lot of good programmers out there. Not a lot of them really understand how to make this stuff hang together well. All the software development disciplines that real software developers have developed over the years, like refactoring and agile development and sort of stuff like that, doesn't work together that well in a data center where you're expected to never make a mistake. Okay? Oh yeah, sorry, we'll get that fixed in the next revision. Doesn't go down particularly well with decision makers when all their data has just disappeared, or you've dropped the wrong table space, or something horrible has happened. And as I tell some of my colleagues, sometimes shit just happens, and that's just the way things are. And the whole thing about infrastructure, guys, we always look to find ways in which stuff could go wrong and then put stuff into place so that never happens. Software people don't think like that. So if we think about, what is the software-defined data center, this actually comes out of one of our internal corporate developed slides. I actually think this comes from an analyst or a reasonably well. I'm okay with this definition, right? Software-defined data center is an emerging data center architecture. And the important thing here is it's an architecture, it's not a set of products. Okay? The other thing that I like about this is it extends from what we're doing with virtualization. So if you've done all your VCDX, which I haven't, but if you've done all that stuff and you've invested a lot of time and money in learning about virtualization, it's a nice extension of that. In fact, virtualization is perhaps another bad word that sort of explains a much broader concept of things, but it's good enough we can think about it in those perspectives. The thing I like about this is that it's provisioned at a policy level, right? So when I talk about this stuff, I tend to prefer talking about policy-defined stuff rather than software-defined stuff, because it's actually the policy and the automation that's the important thing. That's what tends to deliver the value. And you need to be able to deploy it on anything, right? General purpose hardware, specialist appliances, there's going to be a mixed consumption model about how people deploy this stuff. And you're going to have to make sure this includes the ultimate commodity, which will eventually be some form of cloud-based resource. Importantly though, the purpose, the reason why we do this isn't just to save people money on hardware, although, that's a pretty top level concern and what a lot of people think of. That's the bait that gets people there in a lot of cases. But it's about providing operational and resource agility, right? So that's really cool. But apart from us guys, apart from us technicians, who really cares? Because if we come back to what Nicholas Carr said, I think it's over 10 years ago, when he wrote, IT doesn't matter. Back then, it was like a kind of a radical proposition. But the point is that a lot of this stuff we're talking about, whether it being like storage-defined, software-defined storage, or software-defined networking, or software-defined anything, any software-defined infrastructure. Do you know how much the decision makers who have the money, who like to spend things on stuff that makes a difference to the business, do you know how much they care about IT infrastructure? They don't. Okay? Try to have an interesting conversation with a CFO, or a CIO even, or like a CEO or a CMO, or any of those C people, right, about software-defined infrastructure. Unless you're talking about how this is going to save them costs, they're really not going to be that turned on, right? Because infrastructure doesn't make a big difference to them. It makes a big difference to cloud providers because that's their core business, right? But for most people, infrastructure is not their core business, and they just don't care about it. All they want is to be a reliable utility that gets cheaper over time. That's all they want. Now, we know as infrastructure professionals that's a lot easier said than done, but that's the entire conversation that they want to have. So what is kind of more important is their data, okay? So I kind of split this stuff down. This is kind of not a NetApp corporate slide. This is something which I did. There's kind of an important thing about separating data management from storage management. It's not about control plane versus data plane, because you can actually find control and data planes or things that look like that in every single one of these layers that I've got up there. Right? At the bottom layer, we've got the infrastructure as a service layer. Again, a reliable utility service that just gets cheaper over time. And people like Amazon and cloud providers and people for whom that is their core competency are really good at that. If that's your only value proposition to your higher ups and to the rest of the business, you should probably start thinking about how you can actually add value above that layer, right? The data layer is where we have things like data services, and data services and having a conversation about data services is a much more business aligned function, okay? This is where we talk about things like copy services, replication services, encryption services. There's a stack of different data management services, which I think sits up at the platform as a service layer, right? Now, PaaS is kind of harder to consume than infrastructure as a service because, again, it relies upon having people who understand APIs and stuff like that. So there's still a lot of work that goes into actually making this PaaS layer consumable. But this is a lot easier to turn into a business conversation. Because remember, we call it a data center. We don't call it a network center. We don't call it a storage center. We don't call it a compute center. We don't even call it a software center. We call it a data center. And a data center is where we gather and collect. It's a logical entity these days, where you gather and collect your data, and then you turn that into either a better business decision or a better customer outcome. If you're not doing that with the data, you're probably wasting your time, and the business will go back to that whole Nicholas Carr IT doesn't matter thing, right? If, on the other hand, you are turning that data into a better business decision or a better customer outcome, then suddenly the business is taking note, right? They really get interested by this sort of stuff, and I'll show you why in my next slide, okay? But between these layers, right, there are logical and physical networks. So, you know, regardless of whether it's an appliance and it's like fiber channel or it's iSCSI or it's some kind of hyperconverged, clos network or whatever the case may be, again, having a business discussion about that, really hard to do. The data fabric is a much more logical entity, and this is the thing which ties together a consistent layer of data management or data services across your environment, no matter whether it's at the cloud, inside your private data center, inside of a managed service provider. That level of consistent data management is the thing which helps you derive value from your data. And why are businesses liking about that? Because this is the business impact of effective data management, right? You get better decisions, right? 2 times more likely to have that reflected inside of financial systems, right? These are top-level management things. I think this is from Booz Allen. I'll check the details later on. 5 times more likely to make better business decisions, right? These are things which the business really cares about. 3 times more likely to actually do the things that you made the decision on, because it's based on data rather than just guesswork. And again, from Oracle, that's the last thing there, is 93% of customers believe that they are losing money because they do not manage their data effectively, right? This is something which is so much of a better conversation to have with the stakeholders who you need to get buy-in from to help you be successful, right? Than talking about RAID and erasure codes and cross networks, and yeah, it's cool. I love it. I can talk about it for days, literally. But it's really hard to have that conversation with top-level people. So the problem is that while it's easy to talk about this, this is the mandatory storage vendor data explosion slide, okay? 6 trillion terabytes was the last number I pulled out of, like, you know, it was either Wikipedia or somewhere on Google. You know, 72.6% of all statistics are made up on the spot. This one I grabbed off the internet, so you know it's true. Regardless of what that number is, it's massive. And thanks to high-def video, the ubiquity of devices, the whole internet of yada yada, right? Things, machines, whatever, it's just going to get bigger. So you're going to have to help your business make the right decision at an inflection point. And for many people, you're already past this inflection point. For some of you, you're approaching it rapidly, right? And that inflection point is where you either help the business turn their data into a better business decision or a better customer outcome, or it just becomes a burden to IT, whether it's like, we've got to store this stuff, we've got to keep it for lifetime plus 7. All I want you to do is to figure out how I get rid of it, or how do I make it cheaper, right? That's an awful conversation to have, right? Because all it is just cheaper, 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 cheaper. And the result of that often is a massive compromise in quality of service, which they don't want, but they don't understand that they can't have fast, cheap, and good all at the same time. So, what are those sources, right? It's new machine-generated data. And that's going to be the big, big, big thing, okay? A lot of that stuff's going to go to cloud, which is okay, right? That's just kind of natural. But you still have to manage it. There's still all the compliance, all the stuff that IT's been asked to do will suddenly become a problem for the people who avoided IT in the first place, and then they'll throw it over the fence, right? So in order to deal with this massive explosion of data, right, you're going to need to have avoid fragmenting your data management silos. You probably need 1 or 2 primary methods of data management, because you don't want to leave data management up to every single application developer, because frankly they don't care about it that much, okay? Yeah, most largish enterprises have over 1,000 different applications, right? You cannot manage 1,000 different ways of doing data management, so you need to have a few primary ways of doing this. You know, you might have something done at the database level, you know, with things like DataGuard and Oracle or SQL Server continuous availability stuff. You know, that's a great way of doing things. You probably need something which is, you know, like the stuff that NetApp does inside ONTAP. You probably need some stuff which is done inside the NoSQL databases. 4 or 5 is okay. 500 or 600 is not. That turns into an unmanageable mess. So you need to avoid fragmenting your data silos, okay? You also need to take a look at making sure that everything you do is standardized as much as humanly possible. Again, bring that number of management methodologies, and that they're automatable, that they all have rich APIs and API services and allow you to start thinking in terms of service levels and service APIs. That's a change in thinking. Don't think of things like storage tiering in terms of, well, I've got some SATA and I've got some fiber channel and I've got some SAS disks and I've got my RAID, you know, my flashes, my RAID 0, and I've got my oh, hang on, what's flash? I've got flash inside my servers, and that's my RAID, that's my tier -1. It's just, no, that's just the wrong way to think about it. These need to be, dare I say, software defined or policy defined, which allows smart software to determine how to meet a business level outcome in terms of service level and quality. Okay? That's what you need to do, right? Stop thinking in terms of hardware and start thinking in terms of policies which are more easily able to be implemented through decent software, okay? That's the way you go about doing things. So, and the last thing I'd also say is none of this is going to work if you try to mash this into an old school culture of command and control, right? This stuff works best when you embed it in the same kinds of cultures that lead to successful software development. So we're talking about lean and agile business methodologies. We're about talking about having feedback. We're talking about having the ability to have closed loop improvement projects, right? Make loops or PDCA or all the rest of those kinds of things, because that's going to be the thing. It's about people, process, and technology. You can't just do one and expect to get the results you're after, because if not, you're just going to go back to that big chunk of white box Linux servers or your empty data center, and you're going to be wondering what you're going to be doing for your next job. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.